Hello friends and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about everything that I read in November. Now it has been a hot minute since I did a reading wrap up. Going into 2025, I decided that I wasn't going to do them anymore. I was going to instead do like more single book videos. And what ended up happening is I didn't really do those because I realized that I could make a short form video pretty much saying most of what I wanted to about most books. And so I ended up not really doing a lot of long form videos about single books. It just didn't happen. So I decided that one of the things I really want to bring back to my channel in 2026 is reading wrap-ups, and I thought, why not get a head start? I wanted to try a different format with this a little bit, and I'd love to know, what you think of this, especially if you've watched my previous reading wrap-ups. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to try some new things out, maybe get a new format sort of started and going, and just jump back in, because it's been a while since I did one of these. So I'm going to kind of break down the books that I read this month into kind of different categories, because I've been doing a lot of different reading projects. And at the end of the video, I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about what I'm planning to read in December. So, without further ado, let's jump in. Okay, so first category I want to talk about is I've been doing a project where I am reading through my bookshelf. This is called Project Shelf Control. If you follow my short form content, you've probably seen me doing this. I've only made it to my second shelf, to the red shelf. I kind of fell off this project a little bit this year. But the other thing, this is a little bit behind the scenes for you. So what you don't know, what you don't see is that I do unhaul stuff. And sometimes there'll be a book that I don't even want to talk about. I don't want to talk about the fact that I'm unhauling it for whatever reason, right? There are many different reasons that certain books, like, I don't even want to show them on my page whatsoever. So, and then some books I talk about and you physically see me say, I'm going to unhaul this. When I make room on my shelf, I don't just want empty spots on my shelf. And what you see here is only a fraction of the books that I have in my room that are unread. So all around my room, there are a couple bookshelves, and then there are stacks on the floor. They are divvied up and organized by alphabetically organized. So there's the A's, the B's, the C's on the floor next to me. I can look down and I can tell you that I think the D's are down here, the S's are over here. So it kind of goes around. So anytime I make a spot in my shelf of a certain color, I usually try to find another book in my room that has been on my TBR forever, and I try to slot it into that spot on the shelf. So it sometimes might seem like it takes me longer to get through a certain shelf, but that's because I am constantly adding things to it to try and read things that are on my TBR that are technically shelf control, things I've owned forever. They're not on my shelf right this moment because I don't have space for them. So when I make space, I add books to those spaces. So it might seem like it takes me a really long time to get through a single shelf, but that's because I'm constantly adding things in, as I unhaul things, to get through more books, which I think is fine. I think that's kind of the point, because otherwise I'm going to read through all my shelves and then I'm just going to have to start picking stuff off the floor, which is probably what's going to happen eventually in this project. But I want to, get as many things on my shelf and fitted on my shelf as possible. The original dream of this project was to have a bookshelf behind me that was filled with every book on it was something I had read, and every book on it was something that I loved so much that I kept in my collection. That's still the dream. It's just taking a lot longer than I thought it would. So all of that to say, jump to this book, Five Broken Blades by May Cordlin. I think it's May Cordlin. And so I read this past month. Now this is, interestingly enough, I've had this for a while, and I originally got it from Book of the Month. I did a promotion with Book of the Month, and this is one of the books that they sent me. And I'd heard things about the book. I kept seeing people talking about these books. I think the books look beautiful. When you have the three regular editions and they have the sprayed edges, they're just really gorgeous books. And I just decided I really wanted to read them. And they were read and they were in the right spot on my shelf. So I was like, let's go. If you watch my short form videos about these books, you're going to already kind of know what I have to say about them. But they're interesting in that writing wise, they're very messy. Structurally, writing wise, character wise, they're very, very messy. And that comes from a couple different places. I think just the overall structure of the storytelling is a little all over the place. And also there's a lot of very weird sentence structure in this book. I think also the thing that makes these books a little bit wild is that there are 6 POVs. Now, some people hate multiple POVs. I actually am a big fan of multiple POVs if done right. I've read a lot of books where there's a bunch of POVs and the characters all sound exactly the same and they're all kind of witnessing the same moments in the story. And I'm like, why are there so many POVs? we don't need all of this, right? So I can give or take, but I think if done well, I do enjoy them. And I do think this book does multiple POVs well. There are a lot of POVs, but all the characters are very, 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 very different. To the point that when reading the first book, you're going to find, it's definitely not one of those books where you're like, oh, I love all the characters. You're going to have favorites and you're going to have least favorites. In the first book in particular, there's a girl who really, I said this in my review, but like, she feels like an Instagram or YouTube influencer that got lost in a fantasy story because her concerns are just completely different than everybody. Everybody else is worried about. So let me give you a little bit of a breakdown. So you follow these 6 characters who sort of get set off on their own paths from all over this world. And eventually the plan is that they're all going to come together and then they're all going to work to take down the king, who's this just like horrible tyrant. The king has I was about to say a hat. The king has a hat. No, the king has a crown, which is a kind of hat that makes him basically like invincible. Like he can't be killed. So their plan is to like take the crown off him and then do it, and then do the deed. You know how it goes. So they're kind of being like pulled in different ways from these in throughout the story, kind of being pulled together. So the first like half to 2/3 of the book is the kind of like separate groups of like 2 each, and then eventually you kind of watch them like come together, and and then chaos ensues. And the whole thing is like they're all thieves and assassins and things like that, and so none of them trust each other. Many of them have history with each other, which means they trust each other even less. And so this book like really sells itself on like, may the best liar win. The liar who is the liest liar of the land will be the one who lies the most. There's like not a competition. It's just that these characters are very they don't trust each other, and because they don't trust each other, they themselves are untrustworthy because they're constantly lying and being deceptive and not giving a lot of information to each other. It has like an air of the miscommunication trope, but it's not miscommunication in that they're just like failing to talk. Like they are deliberately not telling each other things because they don't trust each other. And to be fair, I completely understand why they don't trust each other. They're not a trustworthy bunch. Like I wouldn't trust any of them either. Anyway, so they're all like on this like pretty important mission, but there's a character named Ari. She is just like on another plane of existence. Like there's one point where they're being attacked by pirates and they get away with their lives, and her like biggest concern is that she lost her favorite pair of heels. Like she is her concerns are like not real life. And it's interesting because it's hard to place this book. I think it reminds me a little bit of when I read ACOTAR. Like it is a fantasy book, but it's hard to like place it in time because there are times where it seems like very historical fantasy, and then there are times where it seems like they have a lot of kind of modern conveniences or even like modern concerns. So it's kind of wishy-washy. Like the world building around the magic system and all of that I thought was actually like pretty interesting, but the world building around just like the world like the time frame and the landscape itself is very muddled and very messy, and you kind of just have to like go with it and hope for the best. So anyway, I read this book and you get to the end, and I found that despite all of this book's flaws, because it has many flaws, it's just like I don't even know that it's a badly written book. I think it's a badly edited book. Many books from this company I find have not spent enough time in the editing cooker, and I very much felt this about this book. It's just not edited enough. Like it just needed more editing to make it a little less like loosey-goosey all over the place, like weird sentences, weird structure, kind of sometimes repetitive in the way that the characters are discussing certain things. It just needed some more editing, but I really ended up enjoying the story a lot. I ended up enjoying the characters quite a bit too, despite their best efforts. Like these are awful people, and I don't know, sometimes I'll read a book. I think The Atlas 6 is a great example. I really didn't like that book. I read it and I just was like, all of these characters are awful. There's no one to root for. I need to have someone to root for. That's kind of an important thing to me as a reader, and I've really found that out about myself over the last like year and a half. And sometimes when there's no one to root for, I really just end up not liking the book. That's how I felt about Atlas 6. I really hated every character in that book, and it made me not enjoy reading it. But these characters are like awful. However, I also found myself rooting for them because they're presented as like kind of like understandable, empathetic, relatable characters, but then you'll find out things that they did in their past. And you're like, whoa, that is a bad person right there. But like in the present, you kind of feel for all of them, which is sort of weird. I mean, it's good storytelling, but at the same time, you would get a glimpse of like some of the characters' past, and I'd be like, why do I like this character? They're terrible. Like in real life, you would steer clear of this person. So I ended up really enjoying the characters, and I think the way that it all comes together in the end, again, kind of ridiculous, but there's some really good revelations, there's some good twists, there's some good turns. And so I ended up deciding that I liked this enough to keep going. So the way that I do series is in Shelf Control is I have a bad bad habit of reading the first book in a series and being like, oh, I like that, I'm going to read the next book, and then I never get to it. And by the time I get to it, because I read so much that sometimes I just forget what happened in that first book, so then I have to go back and reread it, and it ends up being kind of a waste of time. And that's not to say I don't like rereading, but I'm rereading simply because I want to read a second book, and then I reread the first book, and then I'm like, oh, that was really good, well, I'll read the second book later. And it's like this endless cycle. So when I started doing Shelf Control, part of the plan was that if I read a book in a series and I liked it, I was going to continue reading the whole series. And if I hit like a speed bump of like a series that I knew I wanted to read eventually, but like didn't have time for now, like maybe I would just sideline that for a little bit. Like there's a series that I own that I haven't finished yet. It's like 9 books long. I got to that on my shelf and I was like, I'm just not going to do this right now. I'm just going to put it off to the side. We can deal with that later. And in the meantime, I'll keep going on my shelf. We're making the rules up as we go, as you can tell. But I like this enough that I was like, I would like to see what happens next to these characters. So I decided to keep going. So book 2 in the series is called Four Ruined Realms. And I do want to mention Five Broken Blades did this thing. I hate that it's called Five Broken Blades because there's 6 main characters. And story-wise, it does make sense, but I'm still annoyed about it. I'm just so annoyed by it. Four Ruined Realms, the title here at least makes more sense. Like this title works much better for this book for me than Five Broken Blades. Anyway, we follow the characters continue on their journey. I'm going to really try not to spoil too much here because if you end up wanting to read these, I don't want to spoil a bunch of stuff for you. But I will say some kind of specific things that happened in this book, just in vague terms. One is that the first book really is leaning into the characters and the people, and there is like this fantasy element, but it's pretty restrained. Yes, there's a king with a crown that makes him invincible, and yes, there's like another little bit of a magical element that kind of is revealed in the end, but there's relatively very little magic fantasy-esque stuff in book 1. In book 2, there's a lot more fantasy. So we learn about these like relics that were left by the Dragon King, and like different characters are getting them, and they give you abilities, but they also do like really bad things to you. Like they'll give you a power, but then they'll also take something from you. They're kind of mean relics in that way. And one of these relics is the King's crown that keeps him alive forever, right? And if you were to get all of these relics, it would make you like super powerful. So they're like very highly sought after. And so this book is dealing a lot more with that. So that fantasy element is just much more on display here. And I think that makes this book more fun. In fact, now that I've finished the trilogy, I would say that I think this was my favorite of the 3. And I'll kind of explain some of the things that I didn't love about the 3rd book in a minute here. But I found that by this book, I really started to fall in love with the characters. I think most notably were Eri and Royo. Characters kind of get split up into like little couples. And one of the couples is Eri and Royo. So Royo is like a strong man that she has hired to like protect her on her journey. She is a pickpocket. So her whole thing is like, that's why she gets roped into all of this. But then you find out like by the end of book 1 and into this book, she's been keeping some secrets like most characters in this book, but her secrets are like pretty important and pretty big to the plot. And Eri is the one who was like, oh, I lost my heels. And so in book 1, I was like, this girl is ridiculous. Like she is not on the same page as everyone else in this story, and she was driving me crazy. By book 2, I suddenly realized, I had this moment where I was like, oh no, I think she's my favorite character. How did this happen? I think she's a character that like maintains a lot of positivity, and yes, you can look at that as her like not caring as much. She's kind of a privileged kind of character. But also, I think this story is pretty dark, and it's dealing with some really dark themes. This is adult, by the way. This is adult fantasy. There is like a tiny bit of spice, but nothing. It's nothing. If you're like the kind of reader that's like, I need spice, and I need it now, and I inject the spicy books into my veins, you're probably not going to love this. It just doesn't have a ton of it. There's more yearning than anything, and there is some like spiciness, but it's mostly like closed. I think the term is closed door. It happens behind a closed door, so that seems like the correct term. Like it's more like like, you know that characters are doing it, and you know that characters want to do it with each other, and that's talked about a lot, how characters like yearning for each other. But then when they actually like go to do things, it's like you're not getting a whole lot of like slippery sloppery details. Okay, so if you're looking for slippery sloppery details, you're not really going to get them here. But Eri and Royo and their relationship, I just ended up really caring about them, and I think part of it is Royo really falls for this girl, and he really doesn't want to fall for her, but he falls for her really hard. And I think his adoration for her kind of helps to make me understand why I liked her more as well. You know what I mean? And watching him just care so much about her, I think he convinced me that she was special. Does that make sense? Like he likes her so much that I'm like, well, and Royo's a great character too. Royo is one of the few characters that like you learn about his past, but actually what he is believed to have done, he's actually like a good guy. Like the surprise of his past is that he's actually like a pretty good person, actually. Like the worst thing he did is like not even that bad, really. And so to have him care so much about her, I think really helps sell her as a character. I think that's really special. There's some other really great characters in the story as well. And the more you learn about them, the more interesting, the more that I fell for them, with the exception of like one character. There's one character, I'm not going to name names because I don't want to give a whole lot away, but there's a character that starting in book one, I was like, oh, this is probably going to be my favorite character. And the reason for that being, it's a really shallow reason, but just go with me on this. This is a very queer normative world. And I love that about these books. Like there's a lot of characters who are bi, there are characters who are gay, there's a lot of characters that are just like non-specific queer. And it's very normalized in this world. So it's kind of one of the pros of this being like fantasy that you don't really know the time period, you don't really know the place, you don't really know like where this takes place in time or whatever, is the fact that the author sort of plays with that in really fun ways. And one of the ways is that this is just a really queer normative world. And I think that's really cool. And it's nice to see that in a book, especially in like in an adult fantasy book like this. And one of these queer characters, when I met them in the first book, I was like, this is going to be my favorite character because, of course, like, of course, they're a queer character. I have to love them. And I ended up, like, really disliking this character by book 2. And then something really horrible happens to that character at the end of book 2, and everybody in the story is so sad. They're so brokenhearted. And I was like, oh, no. Wow, single tear. Like, I was so not sad. And I don't know if that's on purpose or not. I feel like I was supposed to be sad, but I most certainly was not. I was like, and that was deserved, what just happened to them. I feel a little bit bad about it now, but no, I don't. I take that back. I don't feel bad. They got their comeuppance, okay? And that's all I'm going to say about that. But anyway, I thought the pace of this book was really good. I thought things moved really quickly. I think in this book we get to see these characters because they've kind of come together, and now they're sort of like trying to work together towards this new common goal that they're sent on like a new quest. And I think seeing their interactions and seeing their relationships grow with each other and seeing them still be distrustful of each other, still lying to each other, but like trying desperately to kind of find trust in each other, and the starting of those relationships, the starting of trust. And sometimes that breaks. Sometimes they have these moments where they're like, whoa, okay, I trusted too fast and now something bad has happened. But watching them kind of become this found family in this book is really lovely, and I really enjoyed it. That's not to say that there aren't hiccups. In fact, at the end of book 1, I thought about, there's this scene, if you've ever seen Into the Woods, the musical. Book 1 reminds me a lot of Into the Woods. All these characters kind of going into the woods, everything bad happens, and then they kind of like find each other throughout that. But there's this song where they're all blaming each other, and they're like, well, you did. No, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. And there's this scene at the end of book 1, and there's also a scene in book 2 that is very reminiscent of that. It's like, well, if you hadn't done this, then we wouldn't have done this, and it's your fault because of this. And they're all like pointing fingers. And so this book is like high fantasy with like an Asian sort of influence version of Into the Woods adult. You're going to read it and be like, Jason, this is nothing like Into the Woods, but it is very much the feeling that this book gave me. So coming off of this, like I said, I really enjoyed this one. I liked it a lot more than the first one. I thought the writing was better. I thought the editing was better. I thought the characters were more interesting. I loved how their relationships built. Of course, I was going to read book 3. Okay, so book 3, Three Shattered Souls, is the climax of this trilogy, though we have been told that there's going to be some spin-off-ness supposedly, apparently, at some point. I'm excited for that. This actually was probably my least favorite of the 3. Now, that's not to say I didn't enjoy it. I think the third act of this book and the climax of this book is really quite excellent. I think the way that everything wraps up is really beautiful. I did cry. It has some really just amazing character moments. We also finally kind of see these characters like admit to each other that they have become each other's family. Like in the midst of this whole conflict they're going through, in the midst of trying to survive, in the midst of trying to take down the king, like they have become a found family. And there's like a specific scene where they kind of all realize that they are that important to each other. And it's really beautiful. So that scene and the third act, like climax of this book, kind of save it. The first like half to 2/3 of this book are really mercilessly slow. Like it really feels like the characters kind of just like the momentum of book 1 and 2 just like halts, and the characters are kind of like trying to figure out where they're going, and it's sort of like getting them all emotionally in place for the end of the book. And I get that, and I don't know that you could necessarily take that away, but it feels so slow. The first 2/3 of this book took me like the longest to get through of this entire trilogy. And I just think I wanted things to move faster. I wanted more revelations. And at times, it just felt like we were buying time until we got to the good stuff. It was like, this book needs to be 400 pages and we have to get there. And I feel like the author realized, well, I only really have like 100 pages of like solid content in this book. So let's just let's piddle around a little bit until we get to that. And that really, unfortunately, feels like the first half of this book. It just is so slow. There's just like a lot of there's some moving parts, but it's sort of just like cleaning up the mess of the end of book 2 and kind of setting up the ending. And it's interesting because the first half of this book kind of feels like the second book in a trilogy often does. Like a second book in trilogies kind of have this really bad case of feeling like they're cleaning up the problems of book 1, setting up the book 3, and they don't really have an identity of their own. In this case, that's how the first half of book 3 feels. And I guess if you're going to have a part in your story that feels like that, the beginning of book 3 is a good place to put it. I would rather that, I guess, than your whole book 2 not really having an identity, because at least this book ends on a high note, right? At least at this point, if you're reading book 3, I feel like you're going to see this through to the end. If you've gotten to the third book of a trilogy, you're probably going to push through that kind of boring first half and make it to the end where things get really epic. If you pick up book 2 and the entire book 2 is like that, where it's like just kind of lost in itself, like not sure, you know how it ends and you know how it began, but now we kind of just have to waste some time because this is a trilogy. If your entire book 2 is like that, people are very much less likely to pick up book 3. Whereas with book 3, like, we're already in, right? Like, by the time I realized I was halfway through the book and like nothing had really happened, I was like, well, I'm not going to just stop reading now. Like, I have to get to the end. I have to see how this all comes together. And luckily, I think it comes together really nicely. And like I said, it does kind of leave some room for at least one specific character kind of gets an open-ended ending and kind of leaves it open to a possible, I don't think it would be like a fourth book, but like a spin-off. And I would read it. It left the right character with the right sort of open-endedness that I would read that. If that was already out in the world today, I would have picked it up and read it as soon as I finished this, because it leaves you wanting to know, but it also leaves these characters in a surprisingly hopeful place. For how dark this series is and how much trauma and pain these characters go through, it leaves these characters in like a pretty hopeful situation, I would say. So I don't want to say it's a happy ending. I think that's a stretch, but it's happier than I expected it to be. And I think that's kind of nice. I don't know. I think this book had the possibility of just being completely devastating. And there are aspects, like there's one specific aspect of the ending. Not everybody makes it out, okay? And there is an aspect of the ending that is pretty sad. But I think it could have been a lot sadder, and it ended up in this like kind of nice place. I don't know. I really enjoyed the ending of this book, and I really enjoyed watching these characters become a family to each other. I love a found family story. I'm a sucker for found family. So to have a trilogy be kind of that, I think I enjoyed that a lot. And so I do think if you like things like Six of Crows, you probably would like this series. I've seen a lot of people compare this to Six of Crows in like a negative way. They're like, it's not as good as Six of Crows. But like, I am not really a big Six of Crows fan. I've talked about that before, that I only read the first book and I really didn't like it, so I didn't continue the series. But it has kind of those vibes of like characters coming together to like complete a nefarious plot. So I think if you like Six of Crows, you'll probably like this. If you love Six of Crows, you might read this and be like, it's not as good as Six of Crows. So read it with that in mind, that like it's similar plot wise, but it is different and it's its own thing. And you might not like it as much and you might like it more. It just sort of depends. But I ended up keeping these books. They're on my shelf right behind me, right there on the shelf. I liked these a lot. I don't know that I would ever reread them, but I enjoyed the experience of reading them a lot, and I really enjoyed the characters, and there are moments of these books that have stuck with me despite their messiness. At no point do I think these are like the best written books ever, the best plotted books ever. I think they have some strong structural issues. I think they have some strong character issues. I think the writing is sometimes very weird. And I will say, in book 3 specifically, I started to feel this in book 2, but in book 3, I really felt like there were a lot of moments where the same characters were sort of seeing the same thing and sort of, again, buying time. So their different POVs felt very repetitive. It was like I was seeing the same thing over and over and over again. And that kind of wore on me a little bit. So especially in book 3, there's some repetitiveness there. But Sometimes I'm not able to look past the flaws of a book. Like if a book is really messy and really not well written, a lot of times I'm not going to enjoy it. But this series somehow managed to kind of sneak under the radar. It was a series that, despite its flaws, I still enjoyed my time with it a lot. I still was very entertained by it. So if that's something you're looking for, something a little bit entertaining, something not, you don't have to take super seriously, something that's maybe just like, it's a very fast, like, easily consumable read. Like, they were very easy to, I read all 3 books in like a week. Like, I was like, nom, 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 nom. It was like eating fast food. I like couldn't put it down. It was so delicious. It was probably terrible for me, but it was still delicious. It kind of felt like that. So if that's your vibe, you might like these. The 5 broken blades, 4 ruined realms, 3 shattered souls, and a partridge in a pear tree. So there you go. All right, so the last book that I read, this is not the last book that I read for the month, but the last book that I read as part of Project Shelf Control. I actually just finished this yesterday. So this is Skandar and the Unicorn Thief by A.F. Stedman. This is a middle grade story. I just finished this last night, and I have to tell you, I gave it 5 stars. I really, really, really loved it. Really, really loved it. I couldn't put it down. I pushed myself to read it way more yesterday than I probably would have because I wanted to include it in this video. That's how much I loved it. So this is going to be very like Percy Jackson middle grade type story. We follow a character named Skandar. He lives in a world where unicorns are kind of like feral, terrifying creatures. And at 13 years old, pretty much everybody has to kind of apply to see if they can be a unicorn rider, because unicorns, when bonded with a rider, they work with their rider to do like good things, and they have this like soul bond, and they become like good creatures, even though they're still a little rambunctious. But if unicorns don't bond with a rider, they live forever and they become feral, wild, monstrous, evil creatures, like terrifying, really. And so 13-year-olds are basically, it's almost like the draft. Like they have to like go and see if they qualify to be a rider and bond with a unicorn. And so Skandar's really excited about this. He's been dreaming his whole life of being a unicorn rider. They watch like unicorn riding races on TV, him and his sister and his dad every year. Like he is like all in. But when he goes to the test that they're all required to take, they're like, oh, no, you're not allowed in. And he's like, that's weird. Everybody's supposed to take the test. They're like, not you, go home. So already like something is weird, right? So he goes home, and then that night this woman comes and she's like, I'm taking you to the island. So all the unicorn stuff is done like on an island. It's like a secluded island to keep everything like super secret. And she's like, I'm taking you to the island. Get your stuff. Let's go. And she's mysterious. She looks like she's been in a tussle or two. Something is not adding up, but he wants a unicorn. So he goes. And so he gets there and he kind of like sneaks into unicorn camp and ends up bonding with a unicorn. And the unicorn, I promise I'm not going to tell you the whole story. I'm just kind of giving you the setup so we can go from there. The unicorn he bonds with ends up being a special type of unicorn that is also like an illegal type of unicorn. So he has to like now hide this fact from, the other students and the teachers, because if they find out that he bonded with an illegal unicorn, trouble. I loved this. It is full of twists and turns, some of which I saw coming, but some of which I didn't. There are some really like solid twists in this book. I will say, even though this is the first time I've ever read this book felt really nostalgic for me. It really brought me back to like when I was a kid, when I was reading stuff like this. Now, I thought about whether I wanted to discuss this aspect or not, but I've decided I'm going to, for the sake of just explaining how this book made me feel. So if you will excuse me, I want to compare this book a little bit to Harry Potter. Now, I try really hard not to discuss Harry Potter on my channel. Not try really. It's not hard to not do it. I'm not trying all that hard, but I make a conscious effort like to not compare books to it, especially when I read middle grade stuff, to really avoid it. I don't think it should be held as a pillar that we compare every middle grade fantasy book to. I think that is just ridiculous, especially given the harm the author has caused and continues to cause. But in this specific case, I want to mention it briefly because reading this book as an adult made me feel how I felt reading those books as a kid. And that was really special. I think for a lot of people, a lot of adults who still, are in love with the wizarding world, a lot of times I don't even know that it's because of the books. I think it's because, like, when I think about those books, I'm not necessarily thinking about, like, moments in the book. I know for some people they are, like, they're just in love with the story and the characters and whatever. But I think about how those books made me friends when I was in school. I think about going to my first midnight release party for a book, my first midnight release party for a movie. I think about, like, the nostalgia for it is with the community and the memories I formed around it. And this book made me feel like that. It made me feel like a kid again. It made me feel like I was discovering this magical world that no one else knew about. And like, ooh, I want to get invited to unicorn camp. Like, how cool is this? And I also think it gives me those feels because it has a lot of little rules. Like, I love a world with little rules, and this world has a lot of little rules. And there's a lot of like politics within this world, and there's like a much greater, there's so much going on in this world. I want to know more. I want to know more about everything. I want to know more about, they start in their like first year of unicorn school or whatever. And obviously the next book there is going to be their next year of unicorn school. So it does kind of take things from that like magical school trope in storytelling. But I bring up that series because this series really made me feel like that. And I think the other reason I bring it up, despite not ever really wanting to talk about those books anymore, is that I think a lot of adults who have sort of separated themselves from the wizarding world because of J.K. Rowling, just because we separate ourselves doesn't mean we're not looking for something that feels to us like that, right? Like, we want to feel that, right? Like, we want to feel that sense of childhood joy, that fascination with a world. I feel like I'm always chasing it. I'm chasing that feeling. And of course, trying to find a feeling that you captured when you were 10, 11 years old is nearly impossible. But this book is probably the closest I've ever gotten reading a middle grade book to feeling the way I felt when I read The Sorcerer's Stone for the first time. So pardon me for, like I said, I apologize for bringing it up. I know it's a very sore topic, but I think in this case, it was important for me to mention that because I think if you are someone who is looking for something like that, but doesn't want to engage with that, with that world, with that author, with any of that, I think this is a nice place to go. I really liked this. I thought the characters were great. They were complex. They were interesting. One of the characters is dealing with like panic attacks and anxiety. And several of the characters are dealing with, trying to be enough for their parents who are really, really like expecting big things for them. And there's so many intricacies about the unicorns and the different type of unicorns. And there's kind of this like avatarness where like different unicorns have like affinities to different elements. And I don't know, it was like a lot of my favorite things all put into one book, and I just devoured it. I loved it so much. It was such a fun time. And it also has that aspect where you've got like a little bit of a mystery and you're kind of trying to figure out like, well, what's going on? What's happening? There is a unicorn thief. That's not really a spoiler. It's in the title. There's this like evil person called the Weaver who's stealing unicorns. And when you have a unicorn, you have like a really, really, really deep bond with the unicorn. And so deep that if the rider dies, the unicorn also dies. But if the unicorn dies, the rider is just left like as if they've lost a part of their soul. And unicorns being stolen and these riders just being without their unicorn is like really a problem. And kind of figuring out the mystery of like why this is happening and who's behind it, who's doing it, and how does this connect to Skandar. It's all really fun and it's really good. And I also I love when middle grade is like on the darker side. I think that's why so many people, when I was younger, and to this day, honestly, why so many people like really got into the Potterverse is because those stories were really dark. And they weren't trying to lighten things because we were kids. They were dark, scary stories with, blood and death and scary snakes in sewers and things like that. And this book also does that. It doesn't shy away from the scary. And I love that. And I think a lot of kids will love it. I think these books are doing very well. So book 5 just recently came out, if I am understanding correctly. I think there's also a prequel that also just came out in November. I mean, these books are doing well because of that. Like, I think Percy Jackson is really great at that too, right? Like, those books don't shy away from the scary. And that's really important in middle grade fantasy. I think some middle grade fantasy I read, they're too scared to do anything too extreme because they are aware they're writing for younger people. And I think younger people want, like, they want that. They want that little bit of scary. They want that little bit of darkness because it exists in our world. It exists in their world. And to ignore it, it's not helping anything. And it's making them feel, I feel like it makes them feel a little bit alone. But if you confront that darkness and you show how to overcome it, I think that's so powerful. And this book really did that. I loved it. 5 stars. 5 stars. I thought it was just fantastic. Skandar and the Unicorn Thief. I cannot wait to read more of this series. It was so good. And the only thing I'm mad about is that I waited so long to read it because This was fantastic. Highly recommend. I will also say, when I talk about middle grade, I kind of put middle grade into 2 buckets. And there's middle grade that I think is great for middle graders. First of all middle grade, great for middle graders, okay? But there's middle grade that is only good for middle graders. Like, it is very specifically written for like middle grade or young people, and adults just probably aren't going to get much out of it. And that's okay, because it's written for middle graders. Same with young adult, right? Like, young adult is written for young adults. And if an adult reads that and is like, oh, this is too young adult for me, I'm sorry, Susan, but that's kind of the whole point. It's a young adult book. If you enjoy it as an adult, that is just like a nice bonus. This is a book that falls into category 2 for me, which is middle grade books that are great for everyone. The thing that I always think about a lot with this is like Pixar movies. Like, Pixar movies are kids movies that everyone can enjoy no matter what age you are, and get something like be completely fulfilled by those films because they're made so well. More recent ones, I don't know, but like old school Pixar movies, no matter what age you are, you can enjoy it. And that is where I would put this middle grade book. Like, no matter who you are, no matter how old you are, this was enjoyable, I think, despite your age group. It is just really excellent fantasy with just a lot of interesting characters, a really great world building, and a really interesting mystery with some great payoff at the end of the book. So I liked this a lot, and I do think you should check it out if any of that sounded good to you. Okay, so let's jump over to another project I've been working on. So that was all Project Shelf Control. The next project is something that I started this past month, which is that I'm going to be reading through the history of science fiction. Now, if you're curious which books are on this list, I have a working list that is on my Bindery page, which is easycat.binderybooks.com. I'll put a link to that in my bio. But essentially, that list goes over all the books I'm planning to read. It is a living list, so I may be changing, I may be pulling things out, I may be adding things in. I am just trying to read through Sci-Fi and get kind of an idea of the scope and the evolution of how it has evolved over time. By the way, I'm doing this for fun. We're going to talk about 3 books that I've read in this series so far, and the first 2 are pre-Frankenstein. And so I decided to read a couple things that are like proto-sci-fi, like kind of sci-fi, like sci-fi really before sci-fi. And I decided to read a couple things that were in that realm before Frankenstein, which is like widely considered the very first science fiction book. And so when I started reading these like early sci-fi books, people were so upset at me in my comments. They're like, why aren't you starting with Frankenstein? You should be starting with Frankenstein. So I only read 2 things pre-Frankenstein, and then I read Frankenstein. And you know what? In my comments for Frankenstein, for that video, people were so upset. Well, why didn't you read and why didn't you read the things that came before it? So what I've learned is this project is going to be wrought with not being able to satisfy everyone, and I'm just going to have to be okay with that. I'm very much a people pleaser. I want everybody to be happy, but I'm finding that with this project that is just not going to be possible. So I'm going to do the best I can. So I started this project with Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. This is, now you're familiar with this, right? Like, this is about a guy, he goes on adventures, and he writes about them as like a travel log. So this is technically, though it has sci-fi elements, it is really more of a satirical travel log. And the way that he writes about these things is so dry and so tedious. And all the detail, like, this is separated into 4 parts, all right? And the first part, he goes to an island that is populated by these people that are teeny tiny compared to him. The second island, he goes to a place where he is teeny tiny compared to all of the residents. Then he gets to an island where a bunch of scientists are doing kind of like pointless experiments on a sky island. And then finally, he goes to an island where basically like it's run by talking horses, and they keep like weird deformed humans in stables. So it's this like kind of reverse animal owner situation. And there's moments like in the first part, there's a moment where the little people are like taking items out of his pockets, and he's like, I know you don't need to know the particulars, but and he literally lists every single thing that gets taken out of his pockets. And the entire book is tedious like that. It's like full of lists and numbers and measurements, and the city measured this by this with this, and it's like, it's told in the driest, most tedious way possible, on purpose. That's kind of the point, because it's meant to be like one of those travel logs. But the things he's seeing are absolutely fantastical. And so it kind of like plays with that. It's almost like humorous in that way. It's also like surprisingly it's a little raunchy. Okay, like there are like there's a point in the story where in the town where like the little people are, there is a building that's on fire and he pees on it to put it out. Like there are points in this story that are like quite adult that I was very surprised by. There's a moment where he, as a little person in the place where everybody is giant, the women like to set him on their nips and be like, ooh, how funny. Like there's a lot of that within the story of like these moments that I was like, oh, I thought this was a kid's book. I was wrong. It's got like quite a bit of like raunchiness to it, and I was surprised by that. I will say reading this was incredibly tedious. I really had to push through it. I do think it fits kind of into that science fiction realm. Nothing in this story is ever really explained through fantasy or magic or even alchemy, which was like science of the time kind of a thing. Everything is explained in very like thoughtful, scientific exploration type ways. The way that Gulliver goes about trying to learn about these cultures feels very scientific in theory, learning about their languages and learning about their people and learning about, you know, just like the land and all and the commerce and the politics and the way he learns about all of it. It feels very grounded and very scientific, and it doesn't feel fantastical or fantasy based ever. I think it's especially funny when he goes to the island with the scientists because all the things they're trying to do are just like absolutely ridiculous and none of it makes sense and all of it is silly. And he's kind of poking fun at scientists and philosophers in that situation. And that's also really funny because so much of this has such a grounding in science, and yet he's like making fun of scientists. There is a lot of deeper meaning here. Like everything has like a message to it. Everything is kind of like exploring the politics of the time. And so if you're going to read this, I do think it's best to probably read it with some sort of like annotation or reading it, you know, alongside some sort of companion to be able to kind of understand, because yes, there's a lot of metaphor and stuff that you can totally get reading it, and you don't need like someone to help you, but there are a lot of politics of the time that understanding those will make things in the book make a little more sense, I found. But however, I don't know that I even recommend reading this. I thought it was like insanely boring. I mean, it was one of the driest books I've ever read. Like I struggled to get through this book because I just found it, even though all of these fantastical things were happening, he explains them in such an uninterested way that it made me like, oh my God, get on with it. And nothing really ever of consequence really happens ever. And so I would not read this again. I did not enjoy reading it, but I found it interesting to read it through the lens of like early sci-fi. Like that is kind of what kept me going because I found that aspect of this reading of it to be really interesting. The lens I was looking at it through made it more interesting. But if I was just like, I'm going to try reading the classics and I read this, I would be, if this was the first one I read, if I was like, I'm going to try reading the classics and I read Gulliver's Travels first, I'd be like, never mind. The classics are not for me. This is terrible. I did not enjoy this book. I'm glad I read it. I am glad I read it for the sake of the project. I'm glad I read it. I would probably never read it again. So yeah, that's Gulliver's Travels. It's a no from me. So next up on this science fiction journey, I read a little bit of Voltaire. I read two stories in particular. One was called Micromega, which I did a whole video about where I like read it out loud and then did some analysis of it. Practically no one watched that video. It is still on my page if you're interested, but practically no one watched it, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a breakdown here as well. And then I also read a story that was like I called Plato's Dream, I believe, and both of them were standouts. I had never read Voltaire before, and this turned out to be fantastic. I loved it. So Micromega is a very short story. It's made up of, I believe, 7 chapters. And in the story, we see Micromega, who is a character who lives in faraway space, and he decides to leave his home. He's like a giant of a person, and he decides to leave his home and go on a journey through the stars. And that eventually brings him to Saturn. And in Saturn, he meets a dwarf who lives on Saturn, and the two of them have like a bunch of philosophical discussions, and so then they decide to go on a journey together, which eventually brings them to Earth. And Earth is so tiny and so small that they don't think that it's even populated by actual people at all, but then eventually they find a boat filled with philosophers, and they have a bit of a back and forth with them, and that's really the story. The book is exploring like the philosophy side of it. Obviously, there's like this space travel element, which is really interesting. But the philosophy side of it is really exploring how no matter how big or small you are, no matter how long your life is, no matter how short your life is, no matter how much you know, no matter how much you don't know, there's always more, right? Like they talk about before they get to Earth, they're talking about like, oh, my lifespan is only like 1,000,000 years and it's never enough time. And then, they're talking about, well, we only have 68 senses and still I feel that I can't fully understand the world around me because I need more. And so this kind of like very human concept of like, we always want more, we never have enough, especially when it comes to like things like time and understanding. And then when they get to Earth, they're talking with these philosophers about, they're like in such this tiny little world. And they're like, well, surely in this tiny little world that's so beautiful, you don't have any problems. And they're like, well, no, we're always fighting. We're always at war with each other. We're always fighting over like the tiniest little bit, like gaining a little bit of land, losing a little bit of land. It's like completely pointless. And we're always at war with each other. And they're talking about like what makes up the soul and how do you understand the world around you and like scientific method and things like that. And I found it really interesting because it's such an old story and yet it relates so much to today. And I think it's really grounding to know that the human experience connects us all, not just here and now, but throughout time. To know that people so long ago were also contemplating their mortality, contemplating why are we fighting a war over invisible lines in the sand? Why are we not treating this world better? What is the soul? Like asking questions hundreds of years ago that we are still asking today. And I think you can look at that two ways. You can look at that and be like, wow, we just have really not come far at all. We are still just as much of a mess as we've always been. And that could be a little depressing, but I found it really optimistic and hopeful. I think the fact that we are so connected to each other as humans throughout time and space, I think is really beautiful. And this book, I loved it. If you've never read Voltaire, I would recommend both this and Plato's Dream. Plato's Dream was even shorter. I mean, I read it, you can read it in like 5 minutes. It's really, Plato is having a dream about like the creatures who like created the different planets. And it's just like kind of it's kind of a spin on like talking about different religions and kind of poking fun at that. So be aware, it's all like philosophical satire. But I really liked both of them. They were such a treat, and I would like to read more Voltaire. This was like a nice discovery to realize that this is an author who I've heard about before but never read, and I enjoyed my time with it. So this was a yes. I loved this. This was great, and like I said, I plan to read more Voltaire in the future. If you have a favorite Voltaire story, feel free to recommend it because I'd love to read more of it. And that, of course, finally brought us to Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Now, I will show you, I got this really cool edition. I got the Mina Lima, is that what it's called? Edition. It's got like pop-up pages. It's got like all kinds of cool stuff. And I will say this is probably my favorite thing about this book is this edition that I got. It's really cool. It has like, you can like open these letters. Like I showed it a little bit more on my, in the short video that I did, but it's like a really cool edition. I think it's so neat. And that's the edition I decided to show here on the screen as well. So the story. 18-year-old Mary Shelley writes a story about a man who brings another man to life in the search of trying to cheat death. And Dr. Frankenstein wants so badly to achieve something great in science, and then he brings this creature to life, and then he immediately regrets it. And it's really, this story is exploring, more than anything, it's exploring humanity. What I think we forget a lot in the discussion about this book is we're always like, well, Frankenstein himself was actually the monster, and actually the monster is also kind of a monster. I want to be very real about that. Like the creature does some pretty horrendous things. However, the creature does horrendous things because of the way that people treat him. So he notoriously in the story, he like finds a family that he like falls in love with, and he learns English from them, all while kind of like spying on them from the bushes. Like he's watching them and he learns their ways, and he feels like he's part of the family even though they've never met him. And so finally one day he goes to try and introduce himself, and they are like, wow, monster, terrifying, call the police, he's terrible. And he realizes that like humans are awful and judgmental and terrible, and he blames Frankenstein. He feels incredibly lonely, and he blames Frankenstein for this loneliness, for bringing him into this world and then making him so alone in it. And so he then goes to like terrorize and make Frankenstein's life a living hell, and unalives like several people around him, and they both end up being like pretty terrible to each other in the long run. But it really explores, the human condition and the trauma that others cause to us, how we push that back out into the world. It is also very much exploring like cycles of abuse in a very interesting way. And it's funny to me that this is considered the first science fiction novel because there's surprisingly very little science in it. even when he brings the creature to life, in Hollywood, something that was hard for me with this book, by the way, is like divorcing this book from what I believed Frankenstein was about from watching so many Hollywood versions, right? There's no lightning hitting a tower and him coming to life and it's alive and like there's none of that. Like, and also when he learns to speak, he's very eloquent. Like he's not like rawr, like he's a very eloquent guy. The story is sort of like a book within a book within a book. So we start with this scientist who is like on his way to the North Pole, and he is like feasting for the discovery of that, and then he comes upon Frankenstein in the Arctic, and then Frankenstein tells him the story, and then eventually we get to the creature telling Frankenstein a story within the story that Frankenstein is telling to the scientist going to the Arctic. So it's like a nesting egg of a story, which is like just such an interesting way to like tell this story in its different parts. But all of that to say, when the creature is telling his story, he's very eloquent and he speaks wonderfully. And so there was a lot of moments where I had to kind of like pull myself away from what I expected, from my expectations of this book, to really grasp what was in front of me and what I was reading. There's a little bit of science in that. Yes, he brings a person to life, but we really go from him like, I'm going to collect some body parts and I'm studying pseudoscience and I've got an idea. And like the very next chapter, he's like, I brought him to life in my apartment and now I'm stressed, so I'm going to leave and hope he's gone when I get back, which is crazy. He just leaves him there and he's like, oh, I hope he's gone when I get back, because if not, that will be awkward. It's so funny to me. And so all of that is completely different than what we've come to expect from Frankenstein. If you've ever watched any Frankenstein adaptation, what is actually in the text is so, like, the way that Hollywood has twisted this is so interesting to me. In some ways more interesting than the book itself, I thought. So for me, I do think the part of this book that really hinges on the science is this need to achieve greatness, like this need to reach to a height and achieve it, right? We have a scientist that is trying to get to the North Pole. We have a scientist that is trying to like create life. And what's interesting in both of these cases is that both of those men they don't really fulfill their goals. I mean, Frankenstein does create life, but he ends up like super regretting it, and he ends up basically dying because of it. And our other scientist, he never gets to the North Pole. But what's interesting is that the creature, we believe, like at the end of the story, goes off to get to the North Pole, to achieve that, and then he plans to like die there. And so though they both start these journeys, it is a scientific creation, a thing made of science, that ends up going the distance instead of these men who like made these things, which I found really, really interesting. Like that has such an interesting play on science of like the things we create might be the things that achieve the goals that we aimed to achieve by creating these things. However, other than that, there's not a lot of science in this book. It's really focused on humanity and people and trauma and abuse and all of that. I bring up all of that to say that I struggled through it. It's a very, very, very slow book. Now, I think you can take into account Mary Shelley was very young. She didn't have a lot of, she didn't have any like professional training in like creating a novel. When she first published the book, it was like published anonymously because people didn't believe that women could write books like this. And eventually it like finally got her name on it when they republished it. And also like she was coming off of a whole bunch of trauma herself, like a failed pregnancy, and she was also like pregnant while she was writing the book. So there's all these like little details about Mary Shelley. The thing I found about Frankenstein is that when I was reading it, I really had to compartmentalize it. So if I was reading it with the lens of like, I am reading this as a book that I am reading in 2025, like this is the book I'm currently reading. And if I just thought about it in that context, I didn't enjoy it. I found it pretty boring. I found the writing to be really repetitive. I found the characters to just be miserable, awful, just horrible. But then if I would like contextualize it about the historical side of it and think about the person who wrote it and the conditions under which she wrote it, and also think about this book in relation to the entire history of literature and science fiction specifically, I found that side of it much more interesting. The history and all of that part of the book, the lore of this book coming to life is, to me, way more interesting and way more captivating than the actual text on the page, like on the pages in this book. And I think that's okay. I think when we read classics, people are always like, you have to read it in the context, you have to read it and think about the time. And I do think you have to do that. But I also think you can read classics as just books, right? Like, they are just books. You can read them and think about them as just like another book that you're reading. And I think to be able to do both, to think about it in a historical context and also just being able to think about it like, this is the third book I'm reading this month. I think being able to do both lends more to media literacy, because then you're able to digest the book as like just a book you're reading, and whether or not you're enjoying it and whether or not it is a piece of like a story that you like, but also you can contextualize it within what it means to literature as a whole, and the actual parts and pieces and the structure and the writing and the technique and the craft. And I think you can think about this book in all of those different ways, and it's going to fall in different places. So from a historical perspective and the actual what this book meant to the world, I think is really cool and really interesting. And I think Mary Shelley deserves all the love and adoration she gets for bringing this into the world, because this will go on to affect so many things. There are aspects of this in so much of science fiction today, especially as we talk more about artificial intelligence. But even like one of my favorite books is Jurassic Park. And of course, that also has to do with this man versus nature and man overstepping nature and what comes of that. And all of that happens because of Frankenstein. Like, this book starts something. And maybe it wasn't my favorite book I've ever read, but it's also like really, really, really important to science fiction and to literature as a whole. And I think all of that has to be part of the discussion. So did I enjoy reading Frankenstein? Not really, but I have enjoyed learning about Frankenstein and learning about its history and learning about what it did because it was published, and learning about Mary Shelley. I've enjoyed all of that so much that it's kind of made up for the fact that I didn't really love the book all that much. I don't know. Are you a Frankenstein book fan? Do you prefer the adaptations? What are your Frankenstein thoughts? I would love to know, because I have come to realize that even though I didn't love reading this book, I love talking about this book, which I think is kind of cool because it makes it feel a little special. I don't know. That's Frankenstein. And with that, we are officially kicked off into our science fiction journey, which we will be continuing in December and all the way into 2026. I'm excited to read more sci-fi books. I have read very little science fiction in my life. I've always preferred fantasy and then also just like contemporary fiction. And so a lot of this is like brand new to me. Like, when I made my list, all but like maybe one book on it are books I've never read before. And I think that's so exciting. And I love a project. So I'm really excited to read more sci-fi over the next year and just learn more about this genre and how it became what it has become. And also hopefully kind of see where it is heading into the future as well. All right, last book we're going to discuss for this month. So I also got a really cool edition of this. Let me show you. I have a picture of it there too. But I got this. This is the deluxe like anniversary edition. Oh, it is absolutely stunning, so gorgeous. The edges, the sprayed edge says this is how it feels to be Anakin Skywalker forever. It says that on here, which I think you can see. There you go. Which is, if you've read the book, is a very important quote from the book. So many of you know that I decided earlier this year to read through Star Wars books. I've always been a Star Wars fan, and I wanted to read more of the books. I'd heard they're really good. And one of the things I wanted to do was to read through the novelizations of the movies and then compare them to the movies, like read the novelizations and then watch the movie and compare the two. And so I'd already done The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, and a lot of people had sort of told me that Revenge of the Sith is special. I had a lot of people in my comments of Attack of the Clones and Phantom Menace saying like Revenge of the Sith is like the one, like this is a special book. And they were so right. This is a special book. I think even if you've never read a Star Wars book, if you're familiar with, if you've at least seen the movies, I think you could read this and really enjoy it, because this book, to be fair, this book made me a little mad. And let me tell you why. I have always kind of felt that Revenge of the Sith was my favorite of the Star Wars movies. I know it's a hot take when Empire is right there, but I really loved this movie. And when it first came out, I remember just feeling like it was so much better than Attack of the Clones or Phantom Menace. I really love the way that it wraps things up. I love the lightsaber battles in this movie. I love the action. I love the story. I love the concept of a character that we're rooting for kind of like turning to the dark side and becoming Darth freaking Vader. I just love this movie. I'm mad at this book because it's made me realize how bad the movie is. Because this book is so good. It's telling the exact same story, but in so much better of a way, like so much more interesting. So this book really, it does a few things, and it achieves that in a few different ways. So one is that it often uses second person in really captivating ways to be like, you do this, you are like, it'll say like, you are Anakin Skywalker, you do this, you feel this. And it does that in a really cool way to make you like really get into these characters' minds. The other thing it does is it expands, it super tightens up a lot of the action sequences and makes them much like smaller on page, which is fine. I don't particularly love, I've read a lot of Star Wars books now. I don't really particularly love reading Star Wars action sequences on page, like reading space battles on page, reading lightsaber duels on page. I don't mind that they're there, but sometimes it's too much. Like, I don't need to read that much. Like, it's not as exciting to read, she swung the lightsaber, and they hit the lightsaber, and then they swung, and it's not, that's only exciting for so long on page. It's much more exciting on film, right? However, those are tightened up, shortened up, and then all of the scenes where characters are just, like, talking, and the politics of all of it are really expanded upon, to the point that all of this feels like such a political theater story. Like, we are watching the rise of a dictator, and we are watching him manipulate this young man who just wants to keep the love of his life alive. And he uses that to expertly manipulate Anakin Skywalker into turning on the people who raised him. Like, it is so captivating. It is so well done. And the writing is just masterful in the way that it does this. And it does a really good job of like introducing us to the different characters, introducing us to kind of their point of view in this big, because there's this huge galactic war going on with these different sides. And when you watch the movies, you very much get the sense like, this is the good guys and these are the bad guys. And when you read this book, you very much get the sense that like, well, this is the side the Jedi are on, and this is what they want. But also the other side, they make some compelling points. I don't know that they're completely wrong. Like, you really start to see both sides as you see the conflict, and you understand why it's so hard for them to find a resolution, because they both kind of have some good points. And so watching all of that political theater unfold and watching it come crashing down is so interesting and so good. And watching Palpatine manipulate Anakin in this book into where he eventually becomes Vader is so well crafted. Like, it really sells it. You really understand. In the movie, it feels a little sudden. Like, all of a sudden, Anakin goes and he's like, listen, that guy's a bad guy. You got to go take care of him. And then the next second he's walking in on Mace Windu, who's about to take care of the bad guy. And he's like, no, I need him. No. And then he's like, well, now I'm evil. In the book, it feels so much more organic and real to watch this turn of character, to watch him go from like the hero of the Republic to decimating the Republic. Like, it's just such a good journey. And this book tells this story so freaking well. And I read this, and then we immediately watched Revenge of the Sith. We watched it yesterday, actually. And the whole time I was thinking like, wow, this just feels so dumbed down compared to what I just read. Like, and listen, there's still moments I love, okay? There are still some great moments, but reading it, the book is just so much more powerful. Like, listen, in the movie, when when Padme is like, this is how democracy dies, with cheers, right? I completely just butchered that line, but you know the one I'm talking about. When she says that line in the movie, it hits, but like when she says that line in the book, like, you are gutted by it, because it's so, like, you just see it, like, it's this, she has been trying to be with the love of her life, and she's having kids, and she's trying to maintain, like, she wants democracy to succeed, and she wants a peaceful resolution, and she's watching it all crumble down around her. And it just lands so much harder when Obi-Wan is like, you were the chosen one. I loved you like a brother. Like, it hits so much harder in the book. It's just like every emotional beat is so much more powerful because the structure of the story is so much better built and better put together in the book. I can't recommend this enough. I can't say it's my favorite Star Wars book I've read so far, because The Courtship of Princess Leia, which I read earlier this year, I do believe that will make it onto my favorite books that I read the entire year. I loved that book. And this book is for sure better written. Like, this is the better book. But I loved, like, that book was unhinged in the best way possible. I loved it. It still stands as my favorite Star Wars book I've read so far. I don't know that anything will ever top it, but this came really close. This was excellent. And if you are a Star Wars fan at all, you don't have to have ever read any of the other books. I do think you probably need to have seen the first 2 movies at least, like Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. I think you should at least have seen these. The thing about this book is Revenge of the Sith feels like the third part in a trilogy with Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith. Like, it feels like the third part of that trilogy, which is fine. It is, right? It should feel like that. However, this book feels like the first part of a trilogy between this, Andor, and then Rogue One. Or even like a prequel to Andor. Like the writing of this reminds me more of Andor than it does, like the way that it discusses politics and the inner workings of the Senate and the rise of this awful dictatorship and the Empire. The way this book discusses all that reminds me way more of Andor than it does like the actual prequel Star Wars films. But this was phenomenal. Cannot recommend enough. So good. It was everything everyone told me about this book was right and then some. So good. Okay, so a little sneak peek of what I'm planning for December. Now keep in mind this could all go off the rails because I am a little bit of a mood reader, so if it does, I apologize. But I wanted to put together kind of my vision for December and what I want to read for the rest of the year. So stick with me on this. So obviously I'm going to keep reading Skandar. There are technically 5 books. That 6th one that you see there, The First Unicorn Rider, is a prequel, which I think is out. I might not get to that in December. I might save that for January because I have so much that I want to read this month. But I am planning to keep reading those. I really enjoyed them. They will be my shelf control project for December. I'll be continuing to read through the series, and then I'll ultimately decide if I'm going to keep the series or not. Luckily, I already have a couple of the books. I don't have to I have to go out and buy, I think, 2 of them because I had been sent them as part of like PR packages and then just kind of like put them to the side. And luckily now I'm reading them and I have them. So awesome. We're going to be reading the first book of Earthsea, A Wizard of Earthsea, for my book club this month. You can also join my book club for free by being a Bindery, an Easy Cat Press member. As long as you're a free member, you can join the book club. We do it through Discord. We do a different book every month. Paid members do get to be part of the voting process. So I select 5 books every month and those paid members get to vote on which one we read every month. So keep that in mind. But free members can participate in the book club, which is really cool. We are reading the first one of that this month. I am planning, though, to try and read more than the first one in December because they're pretty short and I read pretty quickly. So I'm planning to kind of delve into Earthsea for the first time in December, which I'm excited about. I love classic fantasy. I don't think I would consider this like dark fantasy. I've been reading a lot of dark fantasy lately, but I'm going to kind of like tie it in with that project. I feel like my dark fantasy project is becoming more classic fantasy anyway. So I'm kind of like slowly making that shift, which I think is fine. And I don't think anybody will complain. And then the next Star Wars books I want to read are going to be the original trilogy novelizations. However, caveat, I might start with, and you guys let me know if you have an opinion on this, I might start with Solo. I might read the novelization for Solo and the novelization for Rogue One before I go into these. I'm still kind of deciding. I might also just read these and then go back to Solo or Rogue One. I can't decide. I'm still on the fence. But the plan is to read more Star Wars this month and hopefully get to A New Hope, whether that is the next Star Wars book I read or maybe I'll read Solo first and then Rogue One and then get to A New Hope. So that's the Star Wars plan. And then for History of Sci-Fi, I am planning to, I've already started reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So that I should have done in the next like couple of days, like 3 or 4 days. It's a little bit it's not long, but it might take me a little bit longer to get through just because it's a classic. With classics, I have to kind of slow down my reading to like digest it because of the language. So far, it's been pretty readable, so that's good, but we'll see. And then after that, I'll be heading into Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That'll be the next sci-fi book after 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I'm hoping to get both of those read in December. I like the idea of 2 sci-fi books a month. They're a little bit more like heavy content-wise because I have to read the book, but then I'm also doing like a bunch of research on the book to kind of contextualize it, like where it sits in the sci-fi canon. So they take a little bit more work than like, reading a Skandar book. I don't have to like research that. I'm just going to discuss them. Earthsea, I'll probably research a little bit. So there's a little bit more like overhead with that. So that is the plan for December. And yeah, so that's everything I read in November, and that's what I'm planning to read in December. I have a couple questions for you before you go. So first and foremost, if you enjoyed this, please make sure to like, leave a comment, subscribe. I would love to see you back here in the future. This is a new format. I'm doing this a little bit differently than I've done reading wrap-ups in the past, and I'm curious us what you thought. Did you enjoy this? This is, like I said, it's a little different. It's a little different, but I'm trying something different. We're trying to evolve. We're trying something new. In 2026, my YouTube page is going to really, especially long form content. I'm planning to make a lot more long form content. You've probably already started to see that. Book stuff like this, reading wrap ups, cozy gaming, which is going to be both video games and board games. And those are going to be kind of the two main things, like main pillars of what I'm going to be doing with this YouTube channel in 2026. Books and games, like really focused. In the past, I've done like a bunch of things and I feel like I kind of stretched myself a little too thin. So now books and games. Now, some of you will also ask about things like Whispers and Crinkles. We'll still do those occasionally. Another big one that I've been asked about is scrapbooking. I am planning to do some scrapbooking as well, but that will be done through a bookish lens. So it'll still be part of the book part of the books and games, like pillars of things. So the first question, I got off topic. Hold on. The first question is, how did you like this new format? The second question, what did you read in November? Like, what was a standout of something you read in November? Have you read any of the books that I read in November? And what are you planning to read in December? Do you have any like big plans of like something you're excited to read in December? You're doing a lot of times in December, I like to do like a big reread of something I loved. Are you rereading something? Are you reading something new? Are you trying to hit a reading goal? Please let me know all of that. I'm so curious. And that's all I have for you today. I hope you're reading lots of good books. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your holiday season. I'll see you back here for more games and books and stuff, but we'll do another reading wrap up at the end of December. We'll see how well I did getting to this massive list. I mean, this is a lot of books. Hold on. This is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 books. It's not that bad. In the midst of Christmas season, what could possibly go wrong? We'll see how far I get. We'll do our best. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, happy reading.